as Ricardo kind of mentioned, this is really a chance to have a discussion around what best practices there are in terms of corporates working with startups and the other way around as well, and maybe what can be improved. So first of all, maybe you could each give me an introduction. Steve, if you could.
Yeah, I'm Steve Homan. I am currently Digital Transformation Director in a business you've never heard of called Collinson Group. We, amongst other things, we have a £500 million business that does airport lounge access through a brand called Priority Pass, which is growing like crazy, and we're flipping it into a completely different business model. Previous to that, I was CIO at the Daily Mail Group, and previous to that, CIO at Fitness First. Previous to that, I was a management consultant and fixed other people's companies.
I'm Mike Rees. I was the Deputy CEO of Standard Chartered up until I retired about this time last year. And I've spent a year marauding around the world of startups, particularly coming out of universities and particularly B2B businesses. And equally on the other side, figuring out what's going on with the world of capital and movements in capital and sources of capital. So I've been working on those two things for a year.
Cool. Ryland, so currently Chief Revenue Officer for Peakon. Prior to that, I was part of the original team, actually working with Rees, Huddle, which is the UK collaboration platform. So we took that from 10 of us to around 200 people at its peak, which has been acquired. Prior to that, the last one I worked in was Capsicum, was acquired by GB Group. So I've kind of gone through lots of transitions of being in startups and then getting in bigger organisations.
So before AVORA, I spent a lot of time working for the likes of IBM, HP and Oracle, building real-time systems for banks or betting companies. Then my own startups, including online pharmacies across Europe, which I sold in 2012. And then I led on to this.
Excellent. So I think maybe a nice way to start is maybe a question for you, Steve and Mike, as in when you're looking to put together sort of an innovation strategy, what kind of things come up to really kick off that conversation, and what kind of let's say risks are there to that you have to consider? So so maybe that's from your corporate angle, yeah.
So I don't think I've ever put together an innovation strategy, because I've always started with, I've never really done a CIO role, I've done changing the business, and I've always taken it back to where do we need to get to? So stripping the business back to what are our sources of competitive advantage that we need to win at and get really good at. So that's the people, processes and technology that bring together things that others can't replicate. And then what are the things that are just enablers, that just need to get done at a generally average way. So in the business I'm in at the moment, marketing can be average, but ecosystem management we need to be world class at. So I've always then taken that and said, okay, if I need to achieve those, and how does that mechanise in terms of products, then you've got a kind of roadmap of, okay, where do I need to get to? Then you have the problem of, okay, how am I going to start doing that? And that's often when I've started to, particularly in the media and the fitness areas where there's tons of startups, said, okay, is there someone who can see part of the problem I can see and can accelerate me? And that's when you start to look at it, and the risks that are is, can I afford to be mum and dad to a company to help them grow? Because often you're going to have to do as much effort yourself as the startup is to get them where they need to go. How many of those can I do that at the same time to get what I need? And sometimes the answer is lots, and sometimes one, depending on lots of different factors. And the risk is always in balancing and understanding the certainty, because you can bet on yourself with a degree of understanding of the risk. When you engaging with new companies, there's a lot of unknown risk, but there's a lot of potential upside.
Yeah.
And I've been on kind of all sides of getting it really right and getting something for an amazing product, and the guys went off and sold the business for everyone was happy, through to just an absolute car crash, which is just hideously painful, because you're the guy going, this is what we need to do, and everyone gets excited.
Yeah.
So that, I would say, they're the big risks, is identifying, figuring out quickly and regularly where you're at in that cycle.
Okay. And how have you found that?
So if you stand back, and I'm going to focus on B2B companies because that's what I've been focusing on and that's what I know. If you think about executives in big companies, their most precious resource is their time. and their time is usually filled with a set of problems and firefighting. And so, you know, I know it's hard. So most executives in big companies have no time to think. So if you read the book Thank You for Being Late by Thomas Friedman, you know, what he talks about is everybody's diary is completely chock-a-block with doing. No one gets any thinking time. And if someone's late for a meeting, it's about the only time you get time to think. And if you read also Nick Gowing's organization on the Unthinkables, he talks about the willful blindness of business and corporate leaders. And they're not willfully blind, they're just, their time is taken up with a series of problems and crises. And to pick up Steve's point, unless you're solving one of their problems, you're not going to get airtime. And so, you know, if it's just noise, then, and it doesn't do anything for them, and so there's two problems there. First of all, you've got to understand their problems, but you've got to turn your idea to solve their problems, because by solving their problems, they get time back. And that's worth something to the company. And that's what you've got to do, is you've got to solve other people's problems, not sell your idea. And that's a difficult thing to do. The second thing is, you've also got to get senior enough in the organization. And of course, the senior you get, the busier they get. Because in many organizations, water only flows downhill. You can engage in an organization at a junior level, but it's never going to get up the organization because the inertia is coming down the organization. So I would say there's two things. One is, how do you understand the problems the people you're trying to sell to are trying to solve, and how do you solve their problem rather than sell what you want to say about yourself? And the second is, how do you get senior enough in the organization so the flow works with you?
And that's a great question. How would you prefer startups to reach out?
So the people you have around you. So when I look to invest in a company, so I ran Standard Chartered, I set up and ran Standard Chartered's private equity business, $9 billion worth of deals, 150 deals in 10 years. So I sort of, so my personal investment thesis is, what strategic insights can I add? What connections can I add? What experience can I add? Because if I'm not adding those three, I'm under leveraging my own money. So from your point of view, you need people around who are going to add those three things as well. Who's going to give you the strategic insights and the problems that are going on? Who knows people in the companies that you want to get into? Because it's too hard for you to go knocking on doors. And experience. So you need to have a group of people around you as advisors who know the industry, know the problems, and know the connections, and are able to open those doors to you, because they give you credibility. The second thing you can do is go one step removed and think about which organizations have those relationships. So I was working with a fintech company recently, and they were struggling to get into the organizations, you know, and it wasn't about the level, it was credibility. So I introduced them to Grant Thornton and the senior partner there, because they've already got those relationships. So you can go one stage removed and say, well, if I can't get those relationships, who has those relationships and I can work with? So it takes a lot of thinking through, but you know, it's getting those things right.
Okay. And then maybe from the startup's perspective, Ricky and Neil, what kind of challenges would you say that you faced when let's say, starting to talk with corporates?
Yeah, so I think I initially fell into the trap. I'm from a B2C background mostly, and then you read about B2B, it's all about inbound marketing, mass funnel, and that's great. All about lead gen, that doesn't really work. It might if you're selling a cheap product, and therefore you're selling to lower end users and expect high churn and so forth. But we didn't realise, I don't think, that our product was true enterprise. So it took a while for us to realise exactly what Mike's saying, that we had to find influencers, we'd call them. So we have a great set of angel investors who are really well connected. They weren't some of the early ones weren't in the right industry for our product, but once we found the right people that could just literally walk us into the BBC, just like, oh god, that was just so easy. And then the value proposition is important, but even having the materials wasn't that important, because we got the meeting. And once you're in, you've got credibility, you can talk about it. So that was really to be fair, that was the eye-opener to me, when we got walked into a lot of these huge brands, and the price went from 20 grand a year to 200. And I had to almost like bite my lip, like, I can't believe this is happening. It's the same product, same problem, same solution. But the problem's much bigger and so forth, so you just handle it differently. So a lot of time spent on that. we rapidly started expanding our influencer network. I say rapidly, even just taking 4 people, that's generated a pipeline for us that is just almost transformational. And then by chance we've been walked into, for example, Accenture, and Accenture are now just opening up everything. And it was literally what Mike's just said.
Okay.
So it was don't waste too much time trying to build funnels and so forth. And instead, just really take your time to find the right people.
Interesting. Neil, do you kind of see the same?
Yeah, I think a number of times I've hit my head on walls trying to sell to corporates because everyone wants that logo on their website, right? I think the key thing I always say to people when you're building the company, and having gone through it a couple of times, is it takes focus and discipline. We do something called right to left selling, which is kind of the point earlier around taking at the left hand side is your product and the niche things that it solves. At the right hand side, we were reading like company reports, annual reports, mapping out accounts, and go right, who are the people that we need to get into? And then you look at your execs, you look at your investors, and go right, who's got connections on LinkedIn? Who knows someone that will open the door? Because if you think at the macro level around what influences that company, what influences their shareholders' price, the risk of it, they're the things that they'll care about. And if you can create something that gets the attention around solving that problem, you're more likely to have a door that you can open. Going from the bottom up, we've tried that as well. Going with like the 3-3-3 rule, which mid-market can work when you go up a level and you're looking at getting into a large organisation where they're hopefully going to invest in you, they'll acquire you, or potentially use your services. That's very, very hard because your point, you won't meet someone that can sign checks. You'll meet people that know about the problem, and that frustration of working with corporates exists there. It's like, but you all know the problem, yet you still won't solve it. It's exactly to your point earlier, is because the person that really cares has not got involved in the project yet. So definitely leverage your network and make the effort to turn up to these type of things. That's the best way you do it, of meeting people. And use the power of whoever is investing in you or your contacts, friends, who will guarantee will know someone. The rule of 7 of everyone knows someone is the best way that you can get hold of the right people.
Can I just pick up on 2
Yeah.
Look, just to prove the point how difficult this is, there are people out there who make a business out of helping you connect with large businesses. There's a company called Matchmakers. Yeah. They make a business out of solving this problem for you, and they take a commission on the relationship. So don't pretend this is easy. It is very difficult. The second thing I'd say is I meet a lot of companies, a lot of people, when euphoria goes up, when they've met the venture arm of a corporate. The reason we're laughing is great, but that doesn't get you into solving the real business problems. And what you're trying to do at these companies is a lot of the time you want revenue. And to get revenue, as Ricky said, you have to get in senior and you have to have a proposition. And the venture arms tend to be off the side here. They're not actually running the businesses. And then trying to get from one to the other is, as you said, extremely difficult.
They're also in the business of generally saying no.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
Something for me that is very important, Mike said, is how you phrase the problem will hugely gauge the reaction you get. If you can, and lots of the information is publicly available on most relatively sized organisations about performance, market, challenges in the market, all Googleable. You can sit on your sofa and figure it out. If you can find enough, particularly company reports.
So stock analyst reports.
Yeah, never ceases to amaze me how much fine detail you can understand about a business just that's publicly available. You can then start to figure out what do you think the acute problems are. And if you then start to understand their competitors, if you can get the 3 or 4 phrases that get the attention, once you get that conversation, you can actually go get someone from, you're here to sell to me, to actually, you know my problem. Because the thing isn't, it's identifying that you both understand the same problem. Once you both understand the same problem, it's a very different conversation, because anything you can't do suddenly becomes okay, I can consider that, versus, well, you can't do everything, which is often, unfortunately, people are driven by often passive fear in those conversations. So the more that you can make that very much about, both seeing it, even if that's all you achieve, I think that's very, very powerful, because they will remember that and take value from it.
And I guess when startups are coming to you and pitching their technology, what kind of things are you looking for to mitigate that kind of risk to working with them?
An understanding and honesty, a candid honesty about where they're at. Saying, yeah, we can do that, and we can scale, and you know, and you're like, yeah, I'm a technologist, I know you can't, right? And when you get the most successful interaction I had, they were honest. They said, we built this, you know, we didn't really know how to do it. So I said, right, my head of engineering is going to come and spend a bunch of time with you. He's going to teach you how to rebuild your platform and get it right. And they're up for that. But it's when you get it when that isn't honest, and then everything's perfect and we can do everything, it becomes, so you've got a date, which is we see the problem, and then quite quickly getting to who you really are. I think people then, they can, because you're giving someone something to go and sell to others who probably don't care as much. So the more honest you are and they're able to position it, they're able to evaluate what's my risk and what's the challenges that I face, or be able to give them somebody who can establish that credibility. So if you're selling to someone who doesn't understand tech, but you take an influencer that does, they're able to give a really honest view. And that to me really helps, because the world is full of brilliant ideas and brilliant businesses. And it's the ones that can access and mechanise that win, you know, it's the chicken and egg problem.
Yeah.
So that'd be,
Okay, interesting.
So I don't understand anything about technology. Okay, and what I do understand is about how to build businesses. And so what I'm looking for is, what problem are you solving? And do you understand the sales process? So I'm thinking about, you know, I'm on the other end of it. What problem are you solving for me? And why is that giving me time? And why does it have value to me? That's what I'm listening for. The technical stuff, you know, I assume someone else has sorted out. But, you know, I'm listening for, what's the sales pitch? What's the problem? And do you understand the process they're going to go through? So if you're dealing with a big organization, usually it's, how do you get the introduction? How do you get the proof of concept? How do you get the pilot? And then somewhere down the road, you may actually get paid. You know, do you really understand the commercialization of that technology in terms of the longevity and solving a problem? So I'm looking for that real commercial angle when I sit down. And I sort of, unfortunately, the technical stuff for me just goes straight over my head, but that's just me personally.
Fair enough. And then I guess, Neil, so from your perspective, you've had a lot of dealings with corporates and obviously worked from different stages of a startup as well. How do you feel that as you go through the conversations, what kind of blockers do you see coming up?
Yeah, I think there's loads of blockers. It ranges from when you think even when you've got the concept and you've got someone going, yep, okay, I can see where it adds value, you're then going to hit every single block in the world around your security, around legals, and all these things are huge costs to start up. And I think that's one of the things people don't think about when they want to chase the logo is, what is the actual opportunity cost for the business? There's a stat from Gartner around on companies that are sub 100 selling into the big conglomerates, and it's like 9 months sales cycle for the same average order values when they're selling to the mid-market. Because you very rarely will go in and get big bang, because they're looking for some kind of proof of concept. Because the risk, right, that's the other thing, is you have to understand the risk of the senior person that they're taking on you, or their reputation, depending on what your product is, the risk they're taking on, they're putting their name against something. So there are, I mean, I'd say we've been caught out, again from experience, it's typically around legals and security process, where even when you've sold the idea, the logistics of working through a large organisation are huge. And I think that the really important point there was around expectation management, which Steve said, which is, I would say make sure you go in with your commercial savvy guy, because if you go in with your respect to all the founders and co-founders in here, you're bound to think big and dream bigger. That's the whole part of it, right? If you're crazy enough to start your own business, you believe you can change the world, and that's great, but if you're selling to a corporate, they've kind of been there, seen it, heard it all before, and their job is to manage risk. So going with someone that's commercial angle, setting expectations, as I've used with my sales team before when they get into it, it's like, you know, when your first girlfriend or the first present that you buy her is a massive diamond ring, you've kind of mismanaged the expectations there, because you're in a world of pain later on. So I say that we go in with the honesty approach. This is where we're at, this is where we want to be. You know, and this is how we think we can support what you're doing, but also you can support us, and it becomes a partnership approach. And if you can find someone that buys into that, you're more likely to go through that journey together. So suddenly going through legals becomes a slightly easier process, because you have the business sponsor sat behind you. When you don't have the business sponsor behind you, you might as well quit, because you'll never get through procurement, you'll never get through legals. So expectation management and mapping out what you need to do to get the deal allows you to qualify out or qualify in pretty quickly. Otherwise you will spend your life kicking tyres with the EYs, the PwCs, or whatever you want to sell to at that level.
I think the same sort of problems. For me, it's are you talking to the actual sponsor of the work? It might not be really high up in the company, but have they actually got the authority? Have they got the budget approved in some way, right? Not, oh, we're going to help you work with us. You're going to do lots of work for 6 months, and then we're going to try and build a use case for this. And that's just you're just setting yourself up for a lot of work, I think. And you think you're going to get the deal when you deliver, to find out there's issues elsewhere, including they might not have the knowledge of other projects ongoing elsewhere in the business, and that's then when IT flags up. Oh, I'm going to do this myself. So for me, it was more around decision maker, clear outcomes, and they're not just trying to do you a favour as such, or they think that they need to be involved with startups because it's it's going to help them somehow without really knowing what they're going to get from it. So, and I think someone told me pretty quick, start charging for trials, and you might not because there's some opportunities you don't. But if you say to them, we always charge for trials, and they don't blink, then you know you're on the right track. If they start getting a bit uncomfortable, then you sort of think, well, actually, maybe they've got the remit they think they have. So we don't always do paid trials, but even if it's just 3, 4, 5 grand in a large company, this is nothing. If they can't even find a few grand to solve a massive problem in their big budget, then you know it's not really serious. I think. Yeah,
and Mike and Steve, I guess from your perspective, what do you prefer people to actually charge for a proof of concept or for a pilot?
I think if it hits the value proposition, it's irrelevant.
Yeah.
It's you're buying into somebody who's seen and solved a problem that you could probably eventually solve yourself. You're buying into acceleration, and there's a cost of that. I've paid for things and then just pulled out and said you're never going to get to where you say you are, even though you've tried. But it's the trying that matters. So I think you should. I think people should be motivated. Everybody should have skin in the game, and you should take it seriously. When you get people, I've seen it, and I've stopped it actually in companies, where people are being strung along and told, and then they arrive. The chief exec goes, "What do you think of this?" I'm like, "It's the same as that, but different." Like, oh, okay, yeah. It's getting to the right person with the right story and being honest about it. And if they haven't, helping them maybe build a story.
Yeah, you might help them build a story, but just by asking them to pay for it, helps qualify all these things we're talking about. Because they have to speak to someone if it's not them to get approval. And if you don't win it, you don't win it. But at least you've had your time paid for. In that sense,
why would you work with a young business and not try and fund them and help them?
Yeah.
It doesn't make sense.
Well, it's actually kind of one thing I wanted to go on to next, as in, what do you think corporates can do to better work with startups and help that process, help them through? Obviously, it's a longer sales cycle.
We could have a long conversation about the biggest business of them all, which is hopeless at this, which is the government. And so, yeah, I mean, we could talk about why in the US it's legislation that the government has to give 25% of its business to SMEs and startups, and why we don't do it in the UK, but we won't get into that subject now. The real issue is, as an executive, you don't get time to think about it. Your diary is chock-a-block, and you don't get a moment to think about it. So, to me, if you don't get someone bringing you an idea with someone who adds credibility to that, it's even not going to get into my diary to think about. And your point about charging, I mean, that's just an afterthought. If I'm being introduced to an idea by someone who I know and has got credibility, and it's solving a problem that takes something off my to-do list, that's it. And it's getting those two things together and hitting that sweet spot.
Yeah. So, Ricardo, how are we doing for time?
Yeah, we've got 10.
Okay.
The other bit I would say is some corporates make huge mistakes by giving M&A type teams a remit. Oh, it's a new thing, so we'll get them to look at it. Who are completely ill-equipped because they often don't understand the business problems.
Yeah.
So it's about how do you create the kit to make it easy for the person to take what you've given them and do something with it. I think, as an example, for example, Stripe sell a very complex product in an incredibly elegant way.
Yeah.
They don't actually sell it. They just kind of say, here's our stuff. And I think there's lessons out there, there's paradigm. I'm a big believer in stealing with pride. There's some people who do a really good job. They're a bank, effectively. They've got a banking license and all that stuff. But it seems fun and engaging and interesting,
I think one of the things that a lot of the big businesses, and I think it has been a shift, the stats point to this, that they do care about startups now, and there is more and more investments in innovative products with large organisations like GM Motors is a good example, and Unilever buying the shave company for however much money. But I think actually it's this kind of stuff that helps as well, and it's a lesson both sides of the coin, which is it links to, we all talk about it's the power of your network, but I think more and more, whether it's a corporate social responsibility piece, whether it's an ego, it doesn't matter really for us as startups, but when you get the C-level from the big organisations come and sit on panels, it's a responsibility then of the startups to make an effort to make the connection. And I think a lot of people go to networking events and then don't do anything about it, don't follow up on it, and then you wonder why you haven't got the connections. And then I think there's more encouragement that's happening for people from C-level to come and help out with events like this that helps to build that bridge. So for me, the ask, whenever we go and, Rees run an amazing contract with Old Mutual Wealth. We're a 50-person company and we're Old Mutual Wealth. That came through network, but now off the back of it, what we're doing is we're keeping the 6 people that we worked with and we're inviting them to sit on panels that we're running. So Peakon's on their mind all the time, they want to help out, and in return we write really positive blogs around how they're a people first person and show them that they're changing the way that they work. And I think it's the buzzword of being like partnership gets overused, but what it comes from is actually taking action. Like, what does it take to be a good partner? What are the things you actually need to do to keep that relationship going? And we make a really big effort around doing that, because trust me, those C-level people know 7 other C-level people. And once you build their trust, they will then show you. And suddenly you've got a network that's 7 C-level people across 7 different organisations.
And go back to Steve's point, is that if you engage senior people well, if you touch the right thing, they will gush about their problems. Okay, what's amazing is you can have a conversation and you say, so what's your biggest challenge? I mean, they will just gush. So if you're just standing there selling them, you're just hitting against a brick wall. If you get them talking, they will usually tell you.
Yeah, it's always fear. There's always a fear that's the barrier. You recognise and share, we see the same fear, people open up. Most management teams are paralysed by collective fear. Hence they're very busy in meetings, not actually
doing anything.
I'd love to open up to the room as well, so if anyone's got any questions or examples of good collaborations or what's worked, what hasn't, then please do shout out.
So I have a question. So how do you see this new role appearing of chief innovation officers, and is a good way to enter these companies, or also on like another branch that you don't have any let's say leverage the other C-level?
I think it depends on what the company's DNA is and what their challenges are. Quite a lot of innovation officers seem to be technology type folks who are not weighed down with some of the difficult things that have to happen day to day, or they're marketeers. And I think it's about, I don't think it's necessarily a role that doesn't carry weight. It depends on the company, but it also depends on what they're charged with, because they're unlikely necessarily to be given a large day-to-day remit because they want to get things going. So I think you have to look at the individual's history and their connections. Who is this person? And then where do they sit within the peer group? So if someone comes in who's much more senior, you probably realise that the board or chairman has said, actually, you need to drive the ship, but we want to keep the management tight. It's all about getting that right, and it's about the background, etc. And I think there's certainly, being quite candid, there's quite a lot of people with fancy job titles. I'm not really sure what they do, which is, with data, digital, all kinds of different things, and I'm not really sure what they do. And when you go and ask them, well, what do they do? It's a little woolly. But there's others who are, transformation.
Very difficult to generalise. So if I'm talking about BBVA, for example, where they just appointed their first CEO to be the previous head of technology, so they haven't taken their previous head of wholesale banking or retail banking, and they made their head of technology the CEO. You've got to believe that the chief innovation officer there is going to have some clout, because you know the type of person that's running the organisation. So it's very difficult to generalise. You've got to do some work, on where's this person connected, what's their experience, what's their relationship in the organisation. Sometimes it's just created as a development role, complete waste of time, because they actually don't have the access and the leverage to the people making the decisions. So it's very hard to generalise, and you sort of got to just do some digging to see where they fit in the organisation, what sort of organisation it is, and how do those sorts of things happen?
You can also interchange what used to be the head of strategy with a head of strategy can be hugely influential or can be a kind of placated favourite. You know, time served placated favourite. It's like, oh, we'll put you in charge of strategy. He won't give you any money, but you can tell us what's going on.
Yeah.
So it's all about research.
I used to, if someone came to me with that title, I'd normally call it timber. Going nowhere. And again, it's a generalisation, but I think that the point you raised at the start is if you don't know what the business pain is, and if the business pain you're solving is innovation, then you're going to spend a lot on that, because it's one of those things where we're innovative, because what big company doesn't have that as one of their brand values? You know, we're trying to drive innovation. You know, they're trying to drive innovation to solve business problems. You know, so if you don't solve the business problem, it doesn't matter how innovative you are, you'll kick tires forever around in that team. So for me, if you gave me a choice of all the C-level that you could meet, you know, I really want to be meeting like COO, CEO, someone that understands operational pain points in the organisation, and then I'll try and map what I do to one of those and have an honest conversation whether it's a good fit or not. I'm not saying avoid all innovation, like you said, that's a generalisation, every organisation, but if I was placing my bet on my research, that wouldn't be where I'd be hunting.
I agree with that. I'd just say that for the people that I've spoken to on those sort of roles, not all the time, but sometimes, they think, you know, innovation is finding a new person on Gartner in the top sort of thing. But this is innovative compared to, say, SAP going back 15 years. It's completely. It's not about going deeper and actually understanding the real problem.
Yeah, that's true. Do we have any other questions? Yep.
So, listening to what you were saying about the difficulty of finding the right person in the organisation, do you feel your frustration? I think it's also frustrating from the other side as a corporate, and thinking about how the corporates want to meet you, you can solve the business problem for them. So how would you advise a corporate to make sure, you know, to bring those barriers down a little bit and make sure that they are providing some kind of access for you to get into the company? Because there are a lot of things like innovation labs, hackathons, whatever, and you know, it's always debated how effective they can be.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough one because I actually put the responsibility on us as a startup, because I think if you capture the right message and the right key point, then you will get the attention of an exec. I think things that's helped us a lot is we appreciate people are super busy, and there's always going to be an element like the evaluation discovery phase. So being able to be pointed in the right direction. So we always have process aim high if you're right messaging. And if you get referred one down, that's actually a good thing, because the key that then most people forget is they don't keep the relationship with the senior person. You know, whether that means introducing someone else senior on your side to hold that and keep it going, and just talk on progress and keep people in the loop, connecting the dots. You know, the best salespeople actually are they're like quarterbacks. They just know what play to call and the right person to bring in. But I think one thing to asking to help is, I think if the senior leadership team areas you've reached out to can appoint someone that owns the project, that they trust and have responsibility for, that gives you an access point. But it's on the startup to ask for that as well. You know, we've got to appreciate, again, my point, the diaries are filled with firefighting, reactive stuff, and then like the strategy piece, right? Which is like telling their board or their investors what's going well and what they need to work on. So if they can give you access to someone that can give you a couple hours a week to work through the discovery and evaluation process, that's normally the ask that we put out to them.
So your question, it's actually a bigger problem, which is it actually starts on the top of the organisation. You would be shocked if you actually knew what went on in board meetings of public companies, because even at the board level, it's about firefighting. There is actually very little conversation going on about customers, business, or strategy. And I know that sounds outrageous, but you talk to anybody who's been in a board meeting of a public company, that's what goes on. So if you think about that's what's going on at the board level, because to Steve's point, that's the pressures they're getting from the shareholder, that just permeates the organisation. And so we are getting companies which are mediocre because there's just no thinking time. And so the problem is you are pushing against quite a difficult problem. And so unless you pick a big problem that they've got and solving that, it's very difficult to get the airspace, because the executives are just part of this tirade of stuff which is coming down the organisation of crisis management and problem. And then periodically you go and say, let's have a strategy day. But the problem is it's completely disconnected. And so it is a real problem. And you know, I don't know how public companies are going to solve this problem, because you know, let me give you a wild example. So in the US, you have to, if you're a bank in the US, you have to do something called stress testing, which is SECA. Okay? Wells Fargo's submission on an annual basis for SECA is 2 million pages of paper. Okay? Now, you know, you think that's just balmy, but that's what the organization's going through, and I just use that as an example to show what's going on in public corporations, that all it's driving is mediocrity in these companies. So unless you can really latch onto that problem, and you know, these executives are really struggling to find time to even breathe, and it's completely wrong. It's completely wrong, and it's not adding value to the shareholders. But the problem is, that's the reality. Sorry.
You got,
Yeah, just had two separate questions. You talked about risk and making a mistake. So startups fail. So one of the challenges for execs is, you know, if you're going to back something, you're backing it, and if the startup itself implodes, your reputation can go down with it. So I'd be keen to hear the example.
I don't think that's necessarily the case. I think you go into it with a clear view of where they're at. You have a very open conversation.
How did you manage that? Sorry, my question was more, how did you manage that back in your organisation?
So it's a question. Whose judgment is that that's a problem?
Yeah.
Because you go in and you're very honest about. If you have an honest conversation, when I meet people that we're thinking of working with, I very quickly get to talk to me about your funding.
Back into the corporate.
Yeah. So you get an understanding of that, and then you share that. You make it very, very clear, transparent, and all that. All this thing when people start nailing, you know, this is going to be amazing. It's just rubbish, right? It's just showboating and irrelevant. Where you're very, very transparent about it, becomes a very clear, open story. Yeah. And then you have a tribulation and you've got a judgment call to make. Do I spend time on, you know, boring thing Y that's generating revenue, or exciting thing X that could generate more revenue? You can make an informed decision together, and people would know why you're spending your time. I think what happens is, if people don't know there's always an assumption, because trust is never perfect, that if something's new and interesting, people will spend more time on it. And I think if you're very open about where you're at it isn't that much of a thing. But that requires a culture at a board or exec level where that's possible, which sometimes has to be fostered, let's say.
Yeah. So quite often, you know, the engagement with the startup is actually one of the smallest mistakes you can make. You know, and it's about this transparency. So in the job I was in, you know, I was lending, you know, hundreds of millions of dollars to Indian companies, to Indonesian companies. I was hiring senior people very expensively. So, you know, in the range of mistakes I could make, this was at the margin. But as long as you're transparent, you know, where you get the problem is where you sort of try to behave it's not a problem, or you cover it up, because there are so many checks and balances in these corporations, it comes out.
Yeah, I would also be careful about the character you judge for yourself, the character you're dealing with.
Yeah.
Because there's quite a bit of, you know, I've certainly worked in a business where most of the management knew they weren't going to get a better job. So there was a lot of protectionism and things. So you had to, I deliberately created a separate environment where we talked and took risk, which didn't involve most of the management team. And you've got to make sure where they at in it. And I think just 2 or 3 pointed questions can get you there. Because otherwise you get the thing, it should be us, right? We're in it together.
But I think that transparency and, you know, don't look at it as I mean, executives are making mistakes every single day on a range of issues, and this is probably at the marginal side of the ones they're making.
Yeah. My second question was maybe just quickly, because I think that's great, because I think for startups you need to understand that, and I've seen engagements where the transparency hasn't happened on the corporate side, it's failed and the exec went down with it.
Yeah.
So I think that was a really important lesson in that. And then the second one is if the product, so you start taking the risk. To the corporate, it sounds like the product is going to fix the problem. As it gets deeper, it doesn't quite fix the problem. How does that get handled? Is the flexibility on the startup side to adapt the product? I know a lot of them are technology based, so it can quite often be software
So that's why I used the rather patronising term earlier, mum and dad. You get involved, and, you know, like I said earlier, we put our head of engineering. Trust me, that head of engineering had loads of things to be doing that were probably more important, but we said if we want that, we've got to invest in it. I think the worst thing is expecting somebody you know is at a certain scale, and you know, I was talking to the guys earlier about their business that's 3 people. Don't expect them to be turning around builds in 2 hours and launching a da-da. So you have to do more for them. And I think that's about setting clear points at which you review and say, okay, where are you? And then sometimes you're going to have to say, right, I'm not giving you any more money or any more traffic or whatever it is until you hit something that we mutually agree is respectable and reasonable. And having that together as a plan, I think if you don't do that, it's you can't expect people to, I don't believe, early stage companies to put undue pressure on them, and actually I think you lose the magic. And it becomes all about you, not about the company. Do you know what I mean? They become, and that's wrong in my opinion.
I'd be amazed if you were able to go into a company and solve the problem.
Yeah.
I'd be amazed.
That's a good point.
It's just not going to happen. Okay, so to your point is it's about, you may have a clue about the problem, but when you actually dig into the problem, it's going to be completely different. So if you need to build that relationship. You know, you've built the entry, but solving the problem is going to be a lot harder work than just turning up and saying we can solve that problem. So you've got to build that relationship of, you know, we understand the problem, you know, and it'll be just like peeling an onion. You know, every layer has a different problem, which is a new adventure, and you just got to build that trust and relationship.
I would also add, I think sometimes one of the trends startups get into that situation because they want the logo so badly, is they also become yes men. Yes,
Exactly. Yeah.
And the whole reason they made the investment was, you know, now I'm going back and we're on innovation, but they did want to do something different, right? You don't want to be just +1. The whole reason they took, you know, to argue the gamble on a small organisation was to drive some kind of real meaningful change. And the point of building a partnership means that if you've got the right relationships, you can be credible and pushing back on certain things. And I think one of the mistakes we made early on with winning some great logos was we became yes men, and what you end up building is something that didn't even solve the problem in the first place, because if they knew all the answers, they wouldn't have come to you in the first place, because they'd have built it themselves. And I think there is an element where you build that strong relationship, where you suddenly get something that's really, really meaningful built out of having, you know, the ability to say no sometimes as a startup as well.
Great. Well, I think we've just kind of run out of time there, but hopefully you guys will be staying for drinks and networking later, and obviously you guys can have a conversation then as well. I'd just like to say a big thank you to our panelists.